There are times when human consciousness awakens so silently that almost no one notices. Nothing changes on the outside, but something within you begins to operate from a deeper, more attentive, more sensitive point to what is happening around you. It's as if an old veil of distractions is lifted, revealing nuances that previously went unnoticed. Many feel this as a kind of heightened sensitivity, a perception that touches not only what is said, but also what remains hidden. And when this perception becomes intense, it can seem like a burden, not because there is something wrong with you, but because few are prepared to live with such clarity. The human mind is accustomed to navigating superficial layers of experience, selecting only what confirms its narratives. But when consciousness awakens more deeply, you begin to notice what is unspoken, what is hidden, what moves silently in people's emotional field. You observe tensions that others don't acknowledge, feel anxieties that no one admits, and perceive expressions of suffering that cannot find words. And often, this more sensitive gaze brings with it a feeling of strangeness. Why do I see this so clearly? Why do I feel what others try to hide even from themselves? This ability is not common. It arises when the mind loses some of its usual noise and presence becomes more stable. In inner stillness, what lies dormant in others becomes visible to you. Every small emotional fluctuation, every word that carries more weight than it should, every gesture that reveals an untold story, all of this is revealed. But for those who still live from unconscious structures, such presence may seem uncomfortable. Not because you do something to expose the other, but because simply being aware already illuminates what many would prefer to leave in the shadows. And so begins a paradox. The more you see, the more you seem to distance yourself from those who don't see. Not by choice, but because refined perception alters how you relate. Trivial conversations can seem empty. Automatic interactions lose their meaning, and certain environments become energetically dense. Awakened sensitivity makes you perceive not only behaviors, but internal states, some that even the person themselves doesn't recognize. This creates a feeling of displacement, as if you were living in a silent field while the rest of the world runs on a different frequency. This is where many people get confused, believing that this heightened perception is a personal problem. But it's not a flaw, it's an expression of the absence of inner noise. When the mind becomes clearer, it stops blocking the subtle information that has always been present. You're not seeing too much. You're seeing what has always existed, but the world has learned to ignore. Much of what some call oversensitivity is, in fact, the inability of others to deal with their own depth. It's important to recognize that this perception doesn't arise so that you judge or carry the emotional burden of others. It emerges as a natural part of expanding consciousness, as a stage where life asks you to remain present, even in the face of human complexity. However, when this presence isn't understood internally, it can become painful. You may feel isolated, misunderstood, or even strange. Not because there's something wrong with you, but because this way of seeing life invites an inner responsibility that few learn to cultivate. There are people who in your presence feel exposed even when you say nothing. The clarity of your perception can touch aspects of them that they prefer to keep hidden. Therefore, some react with discomfort, avoidance, or even hostility. It's not about you. It's about what your presence brings out in them. Awareness always illuminates. And for those who live in resistance, light can seem like a threat. But there is a profound wisdom in all of this. You don't need to carry the pain of seeing. You don't need to save anyone from what you perceive. You don't need to try to diminish your presence so that others feel more comfortable. The heightened perception only becomes a burden when you try to manage it through your mind, when you try to explain it, justify it, hide it, or control it. True transformation happens when you recognize that this sensitivity requires no effort, no burden, and doesn't require you to become responsible for the emotional states of others. It simply invites you to remain conscious, silent, and rooted in what is true within yourself. The real question isn't, why do I feel so much? The question is, can I remain present in the face of what I perceive without getting lost in what doesn't belong to me? Consciousness only becomes suffering when you try to burden it with the ego. When it is experienced from a place of presence, it becomes a portal of clarity. You are not here to absorb the unconscious of others. You are here to recognize within yourself the space where all perception arises and where nothing needs to be feared. And now, the essential question arises: if this sensitivity is neither a mistake, nor a burden, nor a problem, so what is its true purpose? When perception deepens, it reveals something most people aren't used to recognizing: the invisible field that exists between human beings. This field is made up of unexpressed emotions, silent tensions, unspoken expectations, and inner stories that never reach the surface. While most only react to it unconsciously, some perceive it with unsettling clarity. And, in noticing this field, they discover they aren't just observing people, they're observing the energy that moves them. For many, this may seem strange, but there is nothing supernatural about it. When the mind is too noisy, you can barely perceive yourself. But when stillness settles in, when inner space expands, what was previously hidden becomes evident. You begin to feel subtle mood swings, gestures that reveal repressed discomfort, words that carry hidden meanings. Consciousness sees before the mind can name. That's why some people feel like they perceive too much. They're not imagining things. There is, in fact, a heightened sensitivity at work. But it's important to understand that perceiving in this way doesn't mean absorbing the suffering of others. It simply means that your attention reaches areas that others cannot yet touch. Without inner guidance, however, this perception can feel like a burden. A feeling of invasion can arise, as if what belongs to others is entering your inner space without permission. The truth is that nothing is invading you. Everything that appears in your perception arises within the field of consciousness, not within your personal identity. It is identification that creates the weight. When you believe that what you feel is about you, the mind becomes confused. But everything you witness is just a temporary movement in the vastness of the now. The more you anchor yourself in this inner space, the less confused you become by the emotions you perceive around you. Consciousness is like an open sky. Clouds pass, storms arise, but nothing touches the sky itself. Some people live so disconnected from this space that when they meet someone who perceives deeply, they feel too visible. It's not that you're seeing something you shouldn't, it's that they themselves don't want to see it. Awakened awareness naturally illuminates the unresolved issues in others, and this can provoke unexpected reactions: defensiveness, irritation, denial, or even withdrawal. These reactions are unrelated to your intention. They are simply automatic responses to the discomfort of being seen beyond the persona they're playing. When you realize this, the whole dynamic changes. You stop believing there's something wrong with your sensitivity and begin to recognize what it truly is: a call to presence. Not to interpret the other, not to interfere in their life, but to remain awake. Deep perception is merely a reflection of consciousness becoming clearer, not an invitation to burden yourself with what doesn't belong to you. Still, this clarity can lead to isolation. You might feel out of place in superficial conversations, as if you were participating in a game whose rules make no sense. Many people only seek to reinforce their stories, and your silent presence can reveal the fragility of those stories. This doesn't mean you should hide your awareness, but that you need to learn to remain in it without expecting everyone to understand it. There's a common misconception, believing that sensitivity is synonymous with fragility. But true sensitivity is born from inner silence, not from uncontrolled emotion. It doesn't make you vulnerable, it makes you attentive. It's the lack of presence that makes someone fragile, not the depth of perception. When you are connected to the present moment, you don't get lost in what you see. You observe everything without being swept away by anything. Deep perception also doesn't require you to reveal what you perceive. That would only be another move by the ego trying to assert control. True wisdom is silent. It doesn't impose revelations, doesn't try to correct anyone, doesn't try to make others see what you see. Consciousness doesn't want to transform the other by force. It only wants to remain open. And paradoxically, it is this openness that allows change to happen when the other is ready. There are people who react to your silence as if it spoke louder than 1,000 words. This happens because conscious silence dissolves part of the veil that sustains their illusions. Your presence touches something they still avoid, but it's not up to you to decide what each person should face. Life takes care of that process, always at the right time. When you learn to remain within yourself while perceiving deeply, something begins to change. You no longer feel threatened by what you see. On the contrary, this clarity begins to serve as a guide. It shows you when to step away, when to remain, when to speak, and when it is better to remain silent. Perception ceases to be an avalanche and becomes guidance. Nothing needs to be forced. Nothing needs to be avoided. Consciousness knows what to do when you don't interfere. At the same time, the mind may try to use this sensitivity to create narratives, imagine dangers, or over-interpret. All interpretation is a distraction. True perception is simple. It sees without constructing a story, feels without fabricating meaning, recognizes without judging. When you remain present, You perceive others not as enigmas to be deciphered, but as temporary expressions of the same consciousness that lives within you. Deep sensitivity reveals that each person carries entire universes within themselves, universes that are often unseen, even by the person themselves. You perceive these universes not to delve into them, but to remember that every human being is, in some way, trying to return home, trying to remember who they are behind all the roles. And, in the midst of this process, your sensitivity is a constant reminder that there is something beyond appearances, a silent, untouched, immutable presence. And then an even deeper understanding emerges. The more you ground yourself in consciousness, the less you become entangled with the suffering you perceive. You are not a vessel to carry the world. You are the space where the world arises and disappears. But this raises an inevitable question. If deep understanding isn't a mistake, then how do you transform that understanding into wisdom without getting lost in it? As consciousness expands, you begin to realize that not all people experience the world in the same way. Some live almost exclusively on the surface, reacting to what happens outside of them. Others feel the inner flow of emotions more clearly, even if they don't know how to express it. And there are those who perceive life as a subtle, invisible movement, where each gesture, each silence, and each emotional nuance carries a deeper meaning. This difference is not one of value, but of perception. Life expresses itself in diverse ways through each human being. When this perception intensifies, you notice patterns that belong not only to external situations, but to people's internal states. It's not a matter of judgment, but of presence. There are people whose sensitivity manifests itself primarily through feeling. They pick up on others' emotions even before anyone tries to hide them. Others perceive more through silent thought, understanding trends, directions, and possible outcomes before everything becomes evident to others. There are also those who perceive the other person's body as a mirror, feeling subtle tensions, tiredness, or discomforts without anyone saying a word. And there are also those whose perception is so broad and diffuse that it's as if they receive waves of information that they cannot yet organize. These differences don't make anyone superior or inferior. They simply show that consciousness manifests itself in varied ways, depending on each person's inner openness. The difficulty arises when these perceptions are not recognized or understood. Without clarity, what should be a gift becomes a source of overload. You feel more than you would like, perceive more than you understand, and receive more than you can process. This excess creates confusion, exhaustion, and sometimes a feeling that the emotional world of others is overstepping your own boundaries. Inner silence is what transforms all of this. When you discover a space within yourself that is untouched by sensations, thoughts, or emotions, a space that simply observes, all that intensity finds a place where it can rest. Without this space, sensitivity becomes a storm. With it, it becomes clarity. Some people can perceive things primarily through feeling. They walk through a room and pick up on emotions that no one has expressed. They perceive the sadness someone tries to hide behind an automatic smile. They sense tensions that the other person hasn't yet admitted to themselves. Without presence, this can seem like an intrusion, but with presence, you understand that it's not your body that feels it, it's your consciousness that witnesses it. Other people perceive more through silent understanding. They see patterns that unfold effortlessly. They notice when a path is about to crumble, when a relationship is losing its truth, or when a decision is misaligned with what is real. This perception is not logical deduction, it is pure clarity. It arises as a knowing that was not sought, but simply appeared. There are also those whose sensitivity manifests through the body. They intuitively perceive the physical state of others. They notice when someone is overwhelmed, exhausted, or carrying deep tensions. This perception requires neither touch nor words. It is a natural reading of what is present in the other person's energy field. Without presence, this becomes uncomfortable. With presence, it is simply information that arises and passes. And then there are those who perceive everything broadly, without distinction. They are like open antennas, capturing what is in the environment without knowing exactly how to interpret it. Not out of confusion, but because they haven't yet learned to transform this breadth of perception into clarity. Presence is what organizes this perception. Without it, everything becomes mixed up. In all cases, the difficulty lies not in perceiving, but in identifying with what is perceived. When the mind believes that what appears in its consciousness belongs to you, it enters into conflict. Consciousness never suffers from what it perceives, only the pain body, the ego, and repeated stories suffer. When you return to the silent space that observes everything, perception becomes light, not because it has diminished, but because you have stopped burdening it with identity. These different ways of perceiving show that life is always speaking, always revealing something, but most people only manage to hear what matches their expectations. When you are awake, you also perceive what is hidden, and this requires inner maturity, not to interpret others but to avoid getting lost in what you see. Presence illuminates, but does not demand action. It reveals, but does not compel. It shows, but does not force understanding. Deep perception is not a tool to change people, nor to alert them to their own patterns. It is an invitation to remain conscious while life unfolds. When you see someone reacting disproportionately, you realize that it's not about you, but about the unacknowledged pain in that person. When you see someone running from their own truth, you realize that it's not up to you to make them see it. When you perceive suffering, you understand that compassion is not interference. It's simply not resisting what is happening. Presence allows you to see deeply without being pulled into the drama. It's not coldness, it's clarity. You feel the other not to carry your inner world, but to recognize shared humanity. And at the same time, you realize that each person is on their own path, at the pace that life offers. When you understand the nature of this expanded perception, an inevitable question arises. How can one remain conscious without being dragged down by shadows that others have not yet learned to recognize? When you awaken to a deeper level of perception, you inevitably begin to perceive the consequences of that awakening as well. Consciousness broadens your vision, but the world around you continues to function according to old patterns. It is in this contrast that the most intense challenges arise, not because your perception is wrong, but because it has not yet found its place within the collective structure. Most people live anchored in silent agreements, unconscious pacts that determine what can be seen, what can be said, and what must remain hidden. Upon awakening, you inevitably traverse these agreements. There is a type of stability that doesn't come from truth, but from shared denial. Human groups, families, organizations, and even entire societies maintain their equilibrium by keeping certain shadows out of consciousness, not out of malice, but out of habit. When someone begins to see more clearly, that person unintentionally becomes a breaking point. Their awakened presence in itself disturbs the balance based on what is left unsaid, and many perceive this as a threat. Deep perception reveals emotional tensions that the collective has tried to bury. It illuminates patterns of behavior that have been repeating for years. It exposes old pains that everyone has learned to avoid. You don't need to say anything. Sometimes just being present is enough. And for those trapped in ego, this light is uncomfortable. Not because you do something wrong, but because the truth itself, when it emerges, destabilizes what was dormant. This external discomfort generates another phenomenon: isolation. The feeling of being outside of others' reality arises when you realize you can no longer participate in certain conversations or dynamics that previously seemed natural. Consciousness cannot feign superficiality. There is a distance between you and the people who still live within mental narratives. This distance is not a choice. It is a natural consequence of being awake in an environment that is still asleep. Many interpret this isolation as a personal failing. They believe they don't fit in, that they are too sensitive, that there is something wrong with how they perceive things. But isolation is not a sign of weakness. It happens when your inner vision becomes more authentic than the role you used to play. Life removes you from certain environments to allow you to see more clearly who you really are. It's not exclusion, it's protection. But the deepest challenge arises when your perception not only illuminates others, it begins to blend with them. This happens when internal boundaries are still fragile. You perceive others' emotions so clearly that you begin to believe they belong to you. You try to solve what is not yours. You try to carry pains that did not originate in your own field. And without realizing it, you lose touch with your own energy. This doesn't happen because you see too much. It happens because you haven't yet learned to rest in the present moment. When you identify with what you perceive, you create internal resistance. And resistance always transforms perception into suffering. The true boundary isn't emotional, it's conscious. It emerges when you realize you can witness everything without needing to possess anything. The dissolution of identity happens when you believe you need to give form to everything you perceive. When you try to interpret, fix, absorb, or protect, the ego appropriates perception and transforms light into burden. It is not perception that hurts. It is the ego trying to transform it into a task. Consciousness never carries. Consciousness only observes. When you remain present, you realize you can see pain without sinking into it. You can notice someone's anger without feeling the need to respond. You can recognize toxic patterns without feeling responsible for saving them. This is the beginning of a new spiritual maturity, the ability to allow the world to be as it is, while you remain deeply rooted in what is real within yourself. Understanding others doesn't mean losing yourself. On the contrary, the more aware you become of what appears around you, the more clearly you can sense what isn't yours. This is how true clarity is born. You begin to distinguish between the movement of another's mind and the silence that exists within you. And the more you recognize this silence as your essence, the less threatened you feel by the shadows you encounter. Deep awareness never asks you to be the emotional guardian of the world. It asks you to be the guardian of your own presence. And from that presence, you become able to walk through dense environments without being affected. You become able to hear deep pains without absorbing them. You become able to see clearly without needing to control anything. Often, the other person's ego will react to your perception as if it were judgment, but consciousness doesn't judge, it only illuminates. When you remain present, you realize that the other person's reaction is not related to your intention, but to an internal structure they are not yet aware of. The discomfort your presence awakens in the other person is merely the movement of resistance trying to preserve itself. Life then presents you with a choice: to withdraw and hide your conscience to please others, or to allow your presence to become stable enough so that no external reaction determines your inner state. Deep perception doesn't require you to withdraw from the world, but to learn to be in it without getting lost. This is only possible when you discover a point of stillness within yourself that no external movement can touch. This point is the true self, the observing consciousness. When you anchor yourself in this awareness, you realize that your sensitivity is neither a threat to the world nor to yourself. It's an invitation, a portal, a reminder that life is not limited to what appears on the surface. And it is precisely here that an even deeper question arises. If this perception can bring light to the shadows, how can we transform it into a path to freedom instead of a burden? When perception deepens and you begin to see beyond forms, it becomes evident that each person carries within themselves an unresolved story, even when they try to hide it. Some express this story through words, others through silences, and still others through repeated behaviors they don't understand. Awakened consciousness perceives these movements not to interpret them, but because inner truth echoes through everything that exists. And when you are present, nothing that is true remains hidden for long. However, perceiving this truth is not the same as knowing how to relate to it. Some, upon awakening, begin to feel an internal pressure to help, explain, correct, or awaken the other. But this does not stem from consciousness. It stems from the ego trying to transform perception into a mission. Consciousness does not try to save anyone. It simply radiates clarity. When you try to force someone else's awakening, you are not acting in the name of presence, but in the name of identifying with your own sensitivity. Life already offers each person exactly the suffering necessary for them to awaken at the right moment. Interfering in this process out of emotional impulse only creates resistance. Wisdom lies not in revealing what you perceive, but in remaining silent, open, and present. True transformation happens when the other person feels safe enough to look at themselves. Your presence creates this space, not your words. On this journey of profound awareness, you will encounter people who cannot tolerate the impact your awakened consciousness has on them. They may react with irritation, withdrawal, or even hostility. These reactions are not about you. They are natural movements of the mind trying to protect its own illusions. Every person has areas of their life they prefer not to look at. And when someone, even silently, touches on these points through their presence, the mind reacts. The key is not to avoid such people, but to not get involved in the drama they create around their own pain. When you realize that the other person's reaction is not personal, inner freedom grows. You stop feeling responsible for other people's emotions. You stop trying to adjust your vibration to be accepted. You stop lowering your consciousness so as not to disturb anyone. You learn to remain whole even when the environment fragments, but not everyone reacts with resistance. At certain times, you will find those who are ready to share awareness, not out of intellectual pursuit, but because something within them has already begun to open. These encounters are rare, but profoundly transformative. They are encounters where presence recognizes presence, where there is no need for masks, nor stories, nor explanations. There is only shared silence where life reveals itself naturally. These encounters don't happen because you seek them out, but because life brings them when you are ready. The affinity between consciousnesses isn't forced, it happens. And when it happens, you realize you were never truly alone. There have always been others walking towards the same inner space, even if each has taken completely different paths. These encounters serve as reminders. You are not lost, you are awakening. Consciousness also attracts another type of person, those who, even without deeply perceiving it, possess an inner maturity that allows them to sustain their own energy without becoming scattered. They are firm, silent people who are not easily swayed by the movements of the mind. They don't need to understand its depth to embrace it. They simply offer space, and that is rarer than it seems. It's like finding fertile ground where you've always walked on stones. Recognizing these presences requires sensitivity, but not effort. You realize that they are people who don't react immediately, who listen before responding, who don't defend themselves when the truth appears, who carry a kind of simplicity that is not ignorance but natural wisdom. They don't compete, they don't compare, they don't try to mold you. By their side, your consciousness expands without resistance. Life offers these encounters as part of a greater balance. Deep sensitivity can isolate, but it can also bring people closer. However, coming closer doesn't mean losing oneself. It means recognizing the kind of union that is born only when two presences meet beyond identities. And this union doesn't depend on superficial affinities, but on inner stillness. However, even with conscious relationships, it's important to remember that deep perception still requires caution regarding internal pitfalls. One of these is the subtle feeling of spiritual superiority. It can appear when you perceive patterns that others don't see. It can appear as a feeling of already being beyond. But any form of superiority is born from the mind, not from consciousness. True presence doesn't feel superior or inferior. It simply is. Another common trap is the tendency toward total withdrawal. The mind convinces you that the world is too dense, too noisy, too confusing to bear. But this movement, though it may seem spiritual, is merely escape. True consciousness does not withdraw out of fear. It remains steadfast, silent, present. It participates in life without becoming confused by it. It does not reject the world. It simply ceases to be dominated by it. There are also those who get lost trying to save everyone. They become dependent on being needed, believing that their sensitivity exists to solve other people's problems. But this is just another way of identifying with the pain of others. True compassion doesn't carry anyone. It simply illuminates the path, allowing each person to walk their own steps. There is yet another trap, that of returning to the turmoil. Even when someone has experienced profound clarity, they can, in moments of fatigue or emotional turmoil, re-identify with what they perceive. This doesn't mean failure, only that the ego has found a vulnerable point to try to regain control. Consciousness doesn't demand perfection. It only requires that you return whenever you realize you've strayed. Presence is the safe haven where all perception stabilizes. It allows you to see the suffering of others without absorbing it, to see the world's confusion without making it your dwelling place, to see your own shadows without fearing them. Consciousness is the space where everything is revealed and everything passes. Nothing remains forever, except the very space that contains everything. And then a new question arises, quieter, deeper. If perception can reveal so many layers of the human being, what happens when it becomes completely integrated into one's being, without resistance and without effort? There comes a moment on the path of awareness when you realize that profound sensitivity is not just a personal trait, but a natural stage of inner evolution. What once seemed like a burden begins to reveal its true purpose. Expanded perception ceases to be a storm and becomes serene clarity. You then realize that you are not here to endure the world, but to see it from a place that does not suffer from what it sees. When perception is fully integrated, it transforms into living wisdom. There is no longer a need to interpret everything, to carry everything, or to understand every detail. Consciousness replaces effort. Life ceases to be something you try to control and becomes something you witness. This state is not indifferent, it is profoundly compassionate. But it is a compassion that does not wear out, because it does not originate from the ego. Deep sensitivity, when integrated, no longer creates fear in the face of another's pain. It allows you to see suffering clearly, without collapsing internally. You understand that each person is in their own process, in their own time. Life unfolds through each of them exactly as it should. It is not up to you to hasten anyone's process, nor to soften what life delivers to them. At the same time, you begin to notice that what once disturbed you, the emotional tensions of others, their unrecognized shadows, their internal conflicts, no longer finds the same impact within you. What has changed is not the world. What has changed is your identification with the world. Consciousness has become broader than any content that appears within it. This creates an inner space where everything can arise and everything can disappear without you getting lost. In this state, you realize that your silent presence has a greater effect than any explanation you could give. Presence transforms environments effortlessly, not because you try to, but because you dissolve resistance within yourself. Inner peace doesn't impose peace on the world. It simply offers a field where peace becomes possible. Often, the simple fact that you don't react to the unconscious of others is enough to change the dynamics around you. From there, you also recognize when it's time to stay and when it's time to step away, not out of fear but out of clarity. There are places where your presence finds space to expand, and there are places where it is invited to remain silent and invisible. Both are natural movements of life. Consciousness doesn't force its presence where there is no openness. It doesn't try to convince anyone. It simply follows the flow, knowing that nothing needs to be forced. And, paradoxically, the quieter your presence becomes, the more deeply it touches others. Not through words, but through resonance. Some people will approach you because they feel that by your side they can breathe differently. They can lower their defenses. They can touch inner layers they normally avoid. This doesn't mean you're doing something. It simply means that life is using your stillness as a channel for something deeper to emerge in that moment. Other people, however, will continue to react with discomfort, not because you are doing something inappropriate, but because the inner truth that your presence awakens in them is something they are not yet ready to face. You don't need to correct this, nor lament it, nor try to avoid it. Just remain aware. Each person finds their own path at the exact pace that life sets for them. One of the greatest transformations happens when you realize that your sensitivity is not something separate from consciousness, but an expression of it. The more awakened your presence, the more lucid your perception becomes. You see patterns emerging before they manifest, feel subtle changes in the energy of an environment, perceive when a person is about to cross an inner boundary. None of this requires effort. Awakened perception is simple, direct, and unassuming. Over time, you begin to understand that it is not perception that guides life. It is consciousness. Deep perception is merely a tool on the journey of consciousness, not the final destination. It allows you to navigate the human world with greater clarity, but it does not define who you are. What you are is beyond any perception. It is the space where everything is seen. And it is in this recognition that a completely new freedom emerges. You no longer need to fight against what you perceive, nor run away from what you perceive, nor cling to what you perceive. Everything that appears before you, emotions, tensions, stories, shadows, lights, arises within consciousness and returns to it. There is no need for control. Consciousness is not here to take sides between light and shadow. It is the space where both exist. When you realize this deeply, you cease to fear human density. You cease to fear your own sensitivity. Life ceases to be a battlefield and becomes a dance. Each movement, gentle or intense, expresses the same silent presence. Integrated perception reveals another essential aspect. Life uses sensitive people to anticipate collective movements. What you feel intensely is often an echo of what all of humanity is beginning to experience. It's not personal burden, it's attunement. Deep sensitivity acts as a radar for internal changes in the collective, but this radar only becomes wisdom when you stop identifying with it. Deeply perceiving is only the first step. Integrating that perception is the second. The third, the most silent, is living without the need to interpret. You allow life to move through you. You allow consciousness to express itself through your words or your silence. You allow presence to be what it has always been, a mirror of that which is already awakened within every human being. Eventually, you understand that nothing you perceive needs to be carried forward. Life doesn't ask you to be the receptacle of others' suffering, nor the guardian of their shadows. It only asks that you remain awake, that you don't get lost in the movement of the world, that you remain rooted in the only thing that doesn't change, the now. Sensitivity ceases to be an enigma when you realize it was never about the other. It was always about your own return to presence. The quieter you become, the more clearly you see that profound perception is merely a reflection of consciousness, recognizing itself in all forms. And so you finally understand, you are not here to protect yourself from the world, nor to carry it. You're here to see it. And when you see him present, something within you, and within others, finds space to awaken.